Hi there, welcome back to The Conservative, and this is Mike Lannon, your host. This is the Christmas season and the beginning of the Advent season, and this is also a time to look at the politics that are in Washington, D.C., and realizing that, of course, that swamp down there, both Republican and Democrat, aren't doing much. Maybe that's a good thing, but in general, lies, lies, lies. And let's take a look at that for a second and realize that as we come to this TV show, the Judiciary Committee of the House of Representatives has received now the information necessary to proceed with impeachment, and as of this broadcast, had nothing within the written pages that constituted or presented itself as a crime. As a matter of fact, as I come to this table to speak to you today, the operation of a crime was, well, he intended to do it, with no proof that he intended to do it other than hearsay evidence and circumstantial evidence, which is weak at its best. The only one eyewitness to this phone call that they're talking about, which was to the new Ukrainian president, which has been the complete notes of that phone call presented by President Trump to make sure that pencil neck lying Schiff, horse Schiff, was basically lying because he stood in front of the American people and said, this is what the letter said. And then, of course, within moments of that press release by Mr. Schiff, the president released the actual transcript that proved everything that Mr. Schiff said was a big fat lie. And then turning around from that big fat lie came the fact that Mr. Schiff, in a counter argument, said, well, I was only doing a parody. Well, if he was doing a parody, he should have said in the front end, this is nothing more than a parody. For instance, when you are going to quote someone but not actually quote them, you should open that phrase by saying, this is a paraphrase of what I believe the person was trying to say in the quote. That lets the listener know, and or the reader, if it's a written document, know that it's not a direct quote. And the lying press and the lying Democratic Party right now is spinning almost every single bit of the news that's coming to you about the president and his administration. They're spinning the story, which is a disaster because it's lying to the American public. And there was one piece of information given out most recently when the Democratic congressman from Hawaii was sitting there talking to the former Director of Homeland Security. I think his name is Holmes. He was discussing the fact that the immigration issues that are at hand were created by Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. And nobody ever complained about the fact that the fenced-in facilities and the holding up of children were instituted by Clinton and Obama, followed by the Bushes because they were already instituted as laws. And he made a very good point. If you cross into the United States illegally, that is a crime. And the woman from Hawaii wanted to argue about the fact that that really wasn't a crime. Well, if it's on the books then, and you don't want it to be a crime, then it's the job of the legislative process, the legislators, to change that law. But that's not what they've done. And so when, as you watched last week in the hearings, when Shifty Schiff was not allowing the Republicans to question, wasn't allowing them to speak all through this hearing. It's been very, very much a one-sided hearing, a one-sided conversation. That's not the way the political process should work, and that's not the way a process to come to conclusions on criminal behavior and or misdemeanor behavior, or as the Constitution says, high crimes and misdemeanors. That's not the way you get to the bottom of an issue. And I just remind everybody that when Bill Clinton was impeached, the Republicans were in charge of that impeachment, and they made sure that Bill Clinton had lawyers. They made sure that there was a fair process going on for both sides. This is a serious business, this impeachment. And the impeachment business related to the Constitution has got to make sure that it's right, because you're taking the will of the people away from the people. When you impeach a president, you're saying that the electoral votes necessary, the voters and the electoral college got it all wrong, and that they made a egregious mistake and they put the wrong person in there. Well, obviously in Bill Clinton's case, when it came to the floor to vote, he was not voted out. He did not get thrown out. The embarrassment is that in the history books 100 years from now, they will say that Bill Clinton, like Andrew Jackson, were impeached. Now, Andrew Jackson didn't get thrown out. Clinton didn't get thrown out. The closest president to probably that might have been thrown out was Nixon. He certainly had around him a ton of illegal activity that they were placing on his plate. Now, we will never know, because they lost the transcript in the Nixon administration. That was another erasure that would have probably proven that he was as guilty as could be. Just like when Hillary Clinton lost 30,000 plus emails and erased the computers and the phones with bleach bit and smashed the phones up with hammers. That was a definite way of trying to avoid any kind of criminal prosecution. And in Hillary's case, because she had on her servers a well-known documented fact, she had on her servers that were hacked by the Russians and the Chinese and others, she had classified information. Well, if you and I were talking and I looked at you and I gave you a piece of paper and I said, this is confidential information. One, I shouldn't give it to you if I don't feel that I can trust you to be confidential with it. There's lots of things that go on in all of our lives that are confidential. If you are a blabbermouth, or if you are a person that will not be confident with that information, then you should not be trusted with it. Now, you and I sitting here with common sense know that in our lifetime, we've shared information with other people that if it was shared with others would be destructive to a family, or be destructive to a person, or just plain be a false witness that would be disastrous for everyone that was concerned. I was involved with that just today, where I had a piece of confidential information given to me. I'm never going to tell anybody about that. I'll go to my grave with it. It's information that was told to me in confidence. Can I use the thought process that I know without hurting that other person or those persons? Sure I can. I mean, that maybe I can help them understand a point or two if that comes to me. But I cannot, in good faith and honesty, screw around with that confidentiality piece. And that's exactly what Hillary did. And that's exactly what Mr. Adam Schiff has done with the leaking of the information all through this process about what he thought was going to happen. But come down to the point when they've moved this paper out of the Intelligence Committee to the Judiciary Committee, to Mr. Nadler's committee, it seems awfully strange that Speaker Pelosi would not allow Nadler to chair the Judiciary Committee, which is usually the oversight committee for an impeachment, until Mr. Schiff had his turn in intelligence. So what they're trying to do with their lies is to beat up a president. That's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to tear down the President of the United States with as many lies as they can. And I forgot what the name of the congressman is the other day that stood up and said, when we get all done this, we're going to find something that we can impeach this man with. So they lost the 2016 election, and instead of going forward and trying to heal the nation and make it move forward, no, let's act like less than fifth grade brats and tear apart the country by saying this president is an imposter, which is what Speaker Pelosi said just recently, is that the President of the United States was an imposter. And you, of course, know that many people at the end of November 2016 said that the election was impossible because we had to get rid of the Electoral College because Trump won in a landslide in the Electoral College, but Hillary won in the big cities. Well, the Founding Fathers knew that was a disaster because they did not want the big cities to have the big population and control the country, because that would eliminate anybody voted in Vermont. There wouldn't be anybody in Vermont voting if that were true. And also in the Midwest, any place in the country where we had fewer numbers of people, most often right now because the Democratic Party depends upon the votes of those who are dependent upon the government, the poor, the minority groups, which they keep oppressed. And nobody wants to talk about that, but that's exactly what's happening, okay? And so if you go back in history and you look at what Woodrow Wilson did to the blacks versus what Abraham Lincoln did to the blacks and for the blacks, then you would know what I'm talking about when we are politically correct and say African Americans. Well, that's not what they were called all the way up until, well, they were called still Black Americans all the way up until John F. Kennedy, both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. But the Democrats did great damage to the African Americans. And all you have to do is go back and look at the history of what they did, okay? And the Republican president freed them, okay? So the same thing is occurring now with the Latinos. We want the Latinos to come across the border freely, open borders, and if you listen to Buttigieg, one of the candidates running, all they're basically doing is taking back the land that we took from them. You can't go back and look at history that way. And number two is that to the winner belong the spoils. That's been a historical record for any kind of a war. We had a Spanish-American war. We fought the Mexicans. They lost, we won, and we got Texas and a whole bunch of other land. But most people don't even realize we bought all that land from France, okay? The Louisiana Purchase, all that land that was to the west of the Mississippi River and then some. And then we bought from Russia all of Alaska, a great deal of stuff. You know, you have to look at these things and not go back and say, okay, we're going to pay retributions now because we treated people poorly or we didn't do it right. You can't do that because, you know, you make your mistakes and then 100 years later, we're going to force people to pay. Well, we're doing the exact same thing right now in the world of sexual abuse and all these other things. And boy, believe you me, when I hear some of these stories, it just turns my stomach upside down to hear the things that have happened to young children and to adult males and adult females in the sex slave industry and all these other things that people are doing. But I can't go back and look at 100 years ago and say, well, I'm going to pay Joe and Jane's family because of what happened 100 years ago. I sure can go back a year, I would say, and say, you know, report the crime. And I know there's a lot of issues surrounding that would make me think, okay, how do I go about doing that? Because a lot of people, when they're abused or they're assaulted, don't want to report. They just say, it'll go away. I can forget about it. I can learn to live with it. Well, we shouldn't do that. We should go forward and as a society say that's a wrong thing to do. We should make the rebuke. We should make the punishment fit the crime and make it happen. We should not have punishments that are for one group of people and punishment for another group of people that for the same kind of crimes. For instance, down in the swamp in Washington. And so we've got to make sure that when we have people that are violating the rules and regulations, policies and procedures and laws of this country, that they pay the price. That's the consequence for it, whether they be Republican, Independent, and or Democratic. We should not allow and turn the blind eye to those who are in higher power. They don't deserve that kind of freedom from justice. However, at the same time, it is absolutely unjust to accuse someone and then not allow them to have their day in court to be able to prove their defense. Remember, in this country, which is very rare around the world, you have to prove that the person is guilty. The guilty person or the person that's alleged to have committed the crime doesn't have to do a darn thing. They only have to say, I didn't do it. okay? It's on the prosecutorial side of the law that you have to prove a crime. You have to prove all the elements of the crime, generally speaking, in order to get a conviction. Now, I would be willing to bet there are many, many people in jail that are poor, and maybe even some that are wealthy, that didn't commit the crime. And so if they have bad representation from lawyers that don't know what they're doing, or they have great prosecutorial lawyers that know what they're doing, then you could go to jail for something that you did not do. That's very difficult to do, but that's every profession. There are doctors who don't do a good job, and there are doctors that do a great job. There are lawyers that don't do a good job, and there's lawyers that do a great job. There's architects who do great jobs. Buildings and bridges and all of the things they build are renowned, and then there's architects whose designs fail miserably, and we have disasters, okay? Airplanes, the same thing. Engineers, you know, so there's always a good and a bad. There's always a ladder or a bell curve from very, very poor to the very, very best to the very, 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 very highest of the best. So it's always there. So there's no way that we're going to get away from having the good, the bad, or indifferent. So we have to realize that and pick and choose as we go and not worry so much about what we have for outcomes if we don't have the right systems in place to make sure that the outcomes do come out justifiably so. And so justice for some and or no justice for some because they're elite, and the same crime you go to jail for the rest of your life is not fair justice. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, you have people that are really in defiance of the legal system in this country right now, because they realize is that it's not just across the board. And that's what's going to happen when you have a liberal approach to the law. When you look at the law and the text of the law and you adhere to what the words say and you don't allow a ton of wiggle room to the left and right of these laws, then you can make sure that the law is organized and administered orderly. And so it can be very clear, very concise, and you can bring closure to the situation. But when you allow all kinds of windshield wiper movements on a law, flip, flop, then you're not going to have people respect it. And so up until the last 50 years, when we've watched the legal system begin to decline, do we have such nonsense going on? Now, I know we can go back through history and find that there's all kinds of things that have happened that we've tried to correct, but in general statements, when I watched the folks the other day that were handpicked for the Adam Schiff fiasco in Washington, you watch these 4 attorneys talk about the constitutional law, it just drove me crazy, because I've read enough about the Constitution to realize that they were quoting all over the place. They were supposed to be the experts. Well, anytime you bring an expert in that is already biased against the president or biased for a particular political party, and I thought that one of the congressmen by the name of Getz, when he asked at the very end, do any of you know any of the facts that have been presented to in this case, all 4 had to sit in silence. They could not, because they were sworn in as none of them knew anything about the facts of the case, but they could sure say that the Constitution was being violated and that all these things that they had heard were impeachable offenses, and yet they did not know what the facts of the case were, so they couldn't really attest to the actual facts. That's craziness. And I think most people in America who don't have to be lawyers, don't have to be congressmen, don't have to be making $300,000 or $400,000 a year or multimillionaires can sit and say that just doesn't make sense. And I wouldn't want to be treated like that. Most people are going to say, wait a second, I don't want to go to court. I don't want to be charged with something that I did not do, and now they're telling me to keep my mouth shut, sit down, shut up, or get out, meaning get out of the presidency, because I dared to open my mouth, I dared to speak a different kind of political jargon than they want to hear, that I'm willing to not allow the status quo to continue, that I'm going to come to Washington, D.C. and upset the apple cart. Well, I'm glad Mr. Trump is there doing just exactly that. Sure, I'd be willing to bet there's lots of us sitting out there listening to me or watching TV saying, I wish the heck he would calm down his Twitter feed, or I wish he wouldn't say certain things. Look, we all know people that don't say everything exactly the way it should be said, okay? We know that there are people out there that do that kind of stuff, and yet we still like them. We still love them sometimes. And bottom line is, are they accomplishing the things that they say they're going to do? So as long as they're not being egregiously nasty, you're going to allow them to say some things that sometimes, boy, I wouldn't say it that way. Sure, there's lots of us that wouldn't say it that way. But I know people that swear like troopers, and yet their ideas are excellent. You know, now how do you get them to not swear like troopers? Well, you try to get them to not swear like troopers. But I'll tell you, if you're 76 years old, or you're 70 years old, or you're 65 years old, or you're 60 years old, or 55 or 50, if you've been swearing for the first 50 years of your life about every other word that comes out of your mouth, chances are you're going to swear. You know, it's what you have a habit for. And to break these habits is not easy to do. So Donald Trump has some businessman-like habits. He's not like all businessmen, but he's like a lot of businessmen that I've known. And a lot of businessmen that I've known that have made tons of money can swear like troopers. And they know what to do to make money. There's an ad going on right now that Mr. Trump is a fraud because he went bankrupt. Gee, the Constitution of the United States allows for that, because back in when King George of England was running things, if you were in debt, you were thrown into debtor's prison. You might never get out of debtor's prison, especially if they forgot who you were and you were in the deepest, darkest part of the dungeon in the corner of the darkest part of the wall with no light. They might even know that you existed there. That's what they made sure in the Constitution, that there was a right to fail, and that failures and mistakes and errors were considered by the Constitution to be learning opportunities for Americans. It's still there. And may I say that that is a great part of the Constitution, the ability to fail. Yes, maybe we shouldn't fail, but by golly, we do. And that's a great way to have people take the risk, take the chance. Well, the bank takes the risk. They take the chance too. When you say, hey, take a risk with me. The bank knows what they're doing when they look at an innovator or an entrepreneur, and they know that there's risk there by supporting the person economically. There's no guarantee that they're going to make it, okay? So to yell and scream about the fact that Donald Trump did go bankrupt, look at what he's made right now. Oh, gee, I'm sorry, but we can't see his tax returns. I'm glad. I don't think we should ever have allowed someone to personally be demanded that they show their tax returns. What's that got to do with politics? Nothing. It has nothing to do. I don't care what he makes, because I live by a certain rule that all of you should live by. I can't spend your money. You can't spend mine. It's none of your business what I make. Even if I make tons of money or I don't make a dime, it's nobody's business how I make my money, as long as I'm not doing it illegally. And I think most people would agree with that. So why is it that if I'm running for president of the United States, somebody somewhere thinks that I'm supposed to have to give my tax returns to someone? That's not in the Constitution, folks. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that you have to give up your financial information in order to run for office. Because if that's true, we should start demanding the tax returns for all the aldermen. For anybody that runs for any office, we should see their tax returns. Because obviously, if they make too much money, they shouldn't be able to run. Or if they don't make any money, they shouldn't be able to run. Or if they out on the street say, hey, I'm a multimillionaire, but their tax return indicates that they don't make more than $10,000 a year, then that's for us to judge out on the street. We can tell if someone is a millionaire or they're making $10,000. And if they're good enough to make sure that we believe that they're making $1 million, so be it. That's part of what they're doing. So I don't get all of this when we talk this way. So guys, I have to tell you, I've come to the end of the show. It's been awfully quick here, fast half hour, and I want to thank you and See you next time. Bye now.